When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ludlow, and enjoy today's episode. All right, folks, this is Mark Ludlow, and I'm very fortunate and honored to have Mike Trout with us today on my podcast. We're just launching this. This is all a new venture for me. And I've worked with Mike. Mike and I worked together, I think, 4 or 5 years ago for a royal family in the Beverly Hills.
Yep.
And just had the experience to work under his leadership there on that detail. I think that thing went 3 months, I believe. And it was, you can tell by him shaking his head how fun that was.
Seemed to go forever.
But I learned a lot from Mike, and his pedigree speaks for itself. He spent an entire career with the Air Force, United States Air Force, and then he ventured off. And I guess you got recruited by the CIA to become a CIA agent, correct, Mike?
CIA special agent, which I sort of went into the special police officer funnel, if you will, to the agency, which a lot of people do, right. And then became a special agent. We could talk about that later. Yeah.
Sure. And then what he's known for is his endorsement on his book called The Protected, which I got right here. And I read through it. He autographed it for me. And it's been a pleasure to read because it definitely opened my eyes. And if you're an audience in the security industry, this will be the book you need to read to understand what's going on in the corporate arena. And Mike covers it from A to Z. And I got that endorsement from George Tenet. You were in charge of George Tenet's detail and his keeping his family safe, as he puts it. And Mike did that for several years. And it was quite an honor to work with them. And that Beverly Hills detail is like, I think they fired 50 people in the first 2 weeks that I got on that thing. Fired 2 teams, 1 driving team, and we got on there, and it was like, whoa, grab on the rope and hold on tight. But I'm going to, I read the part of the book, the author's note in your book, Mike, about, I just kind of put my own notes here. Most people don't understand the journey the author has to go through in writing a book. And under the author's note, you had a former colleague and a coworker that asked you how long it took you to write that book. And you said with a smile, 30 years. Go ahead and elaborate on that.
Mark, thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. Number one, for the introduction. One correction. I was an assistant team leader on George Tenet's protective detail, not the detail leader. A couple of different runs up from myself, but I appreciate that. And thanks again for the intro. Yeah, no, I don't think you can write a book, especially about a career or a profession and hit all the points unless you've lived through it. Right. And that's going to take you a few decades, could be a couple of decades. For me, it was about 30 years before I began to think about writing a book. But that 30 years, just like yourself, you begin to think about different incidents, different situations, different scenarios, different training. And next thing you know, you've probably got enough information for a book. Having the information is not the hard part. The hard part's weaving it all together into a book. But I appreciate your mention about Mr. Tenet's endorsement. To be honest, he may never know this, but I think he made the book better. Sure. Not because of his endorsement, but because of the pressure I was under to write a better book.
Wow.
The book was probably ready to come out about 2 years before he agreed to endorse it.
Wow.
And to be quite honest, I read the book, and my wife did a lot of work for me and with me on editing the book. And we both sort of took that time, looked at the book and said, it's not worthy of Mr. Tenet's endorsement. So pressure was on to go back and make it a better book. But I appreciated that opportunity. And his endorsement made it a better book just because it put more pressure on me to really dive deeper into it and do a better job writing.
And if someone had told you from day one as an agent in the CIA, 30 years later, you'd be writing a book, what would you think to yourself at your age of 25 or whatever age you were then? Would you say, yeah, right?
Yeah, I don't think, I thought maybe in terms of a fiction book, sure. Because you see a lot of things when you're in an organization like the CIA that might spark your imagination to write a fiction book. But to write a nonfiction book about your craft, I thought that's a long shot. Never really thought about it. As I mentioned, when I made the transition from the Air Force to the CIA, I thought I brought with me a fair amount of experience and tools in a toolbox, and really had a good head start to being a special agent for the agency on the protective detail for the director. And I mentioned in my book, I think it was my interview, it took about 5 minutes for that interview process to prove me wrong.
Wow.
What I thought I brought with me was still not enough. So to think you have enough material, enough experience to write a book your first few years at the agency, I would say that's ridiculous. Unless you're writing about a particular event.
Sure.
Or a particular situation, you might be able to pontificate enough on that for 200 or 300 pages. But no, I had no vision, had no desire to write a book while I was in the agency. That this desire came much later once I left the agency.
So a lot of maturity and journeying.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Those hundreds of stories you tell that I read through that book of stuff like, how did he ever make it through that? The bombings that you heard at the airport in Germany, and just the countless stories. It's just remarkable. And just like, this should be the book that you have in an EP, executive protection training course. I would highly recommend that being a curriculum. It's just, that's that good of a book. And I'm sure.
I appreciate that, Mark. And I think the stories, it was a tough decision to even put stories into it, because the book is really for practitioners and to be quite honest, the main motivation to write the book was for principals, those who we protect.
Right.
Because they're often left out of the conversation of why we do certain things and how we do certain things. So in order to think about that, I had to really think about the principles and what did we want to get across to them as a group of practitioners.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of different motivations for writing the book, but the one main one was to help principals understand what it is we do and why we do it.
Yeah, it was weird when I was reading through it. I was going back to my days working at XYZ client in Silicon Valley, which I had signed non-disclosure agreements, so I can't tell that, but I could relate. I was so relatable, being a practitioner, operator, and on the ground down there in the Bay Area. It's just there's so many things that correlated just in the few chapters you covered in that, especially in programming. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's your point. That was my point of putting the stories in. It wasn't to glorify anything that I've done. It was to if I'm teaching a topic or talking about a topic, I wanted the reader to understand and get a visual of that topic.
Right.
So the best way I could do that was to write a story that related to that.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it was a story that I was involved with or other stories. There's a few stories in there that's not about me, but it's about other individuals. So I think hopefully that gives the reader a little bit more visual concept of the content we're trying to get across to them.
That makes sense. The page 107, I think it is, or 102 in your layers of security diagram. We're in 2020. It's kind of crazy right now. We're in an election year. I mean, the elephant's in the room. We know what we know. In your professional expert opinion, what is the most significant part of the layer of security that you put in that diagram in your book? What do you feel most security operators, agents, or program managers should be focused on right now in 2020?
Mark, you're putting me on the spot here. I don't think it's one thing, and I think that's why there are layers. I think it's critical. Those layers really weave together to form the whole program.
Right.
If you take one or two layers out, it's like removing the foundation from your building, from your house. You're going to have issues.
Sure.
So I think, you could sit there and say that I think maybe the intelligence is an important aspect. Intelligence gives us hopefully that information of maybe pre-announcing of an attack or catching surveillance or understanding what's going on with social media, maybe that affects our principle. So could I take that out and say that it's more important to have physical security around the office or the residence? No. So I don't think there is one single most important element of that layer, because I think they all really work together to form one layer, like a Kevlar.
Right.
Kevlar is many pieces of layer. If we took certain layers out, it's not effective.
Yeah.
So it's kind of similar to that.
Sure. Now, you mentioned social media. Is that a big thing right now with the misinformation coming in from the left and you have the right and you got all this information? Is social media the Achilles heel right now in the culture, you think?
I think it, this is just one person's opinion. I almost think it's going to be a failed experiment.
Interesting.
I really do. I got a feeling we're continuing to go down the road where, maybe other countries will do it before us. China has, Russia has to a degree, Iran.
Right.
There's certain countries clamping down on what they will and will not allow in terms of social media.
Sure.
Obviously, social media does a lot of good, hands down, does a lot of good stuff.
Right.
But I think we haven't seen, or we haven't really been able to measure how bad it does in terms of, false information. I think the first time we see a major incident that involves a large loss of life,
Right.
involved with misinformation, I think we're going to have to take a hard look. How do you get into censorship of that? I have no doubt that the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and Facebook and all the other brilliant minds who came up with a lot of these social media platforms are probably scratching their head too at some point and going, I didn't quite see it becoming this animal that we can't control. If you look at Facebook, I was part of an article we put together years ago about whether or not Facebook is becoming a nation state themselves. They're so big. I mean, they could, as a platform, they could, if not managed right, change an election or allow an election to be changed.
Sure.
So to have a company that has that level of power comes a great deal of responsibility. And I think the decision is still out on all of these platforms, whether or not they can properly manage it with the influence of foreign nations coming in and having a heyday on those platforms. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'm probably getting beyond my skis on that topic, just a personal opinion, but at some point in time, it may be a failed experiment. We'll see what happens.
That makes sense to me. Something that came through my mind while you're explaining all that, I think the conversation right now is what the heck is going on with that Beirut, Lebanon. I've seen so many videos of that explosion. It looked like an A-bomb going up, blowing a hole in the port there. Any intel you got from your sources on what that was all about? What is that?
I think pretty much we've seen the news accurately describe what happened. Now, there's probably some details that we may not be aware of in terms of the Russian ship, the Russian owner of this material, who it was being delivered to when it was seized, or was it truly seized? Why was it stored so long in that port? But I do have a friend of mine who did an assessment in that port about a year ago, and he said they highlighted this, and they're not the only ones. So incompetence, lack of management, Hezbollah saying, no, you're not moving it. I have no idea. I mean, it'll come out. It'll be interesting to see, and it'll probably be a great book. But it's a tragedy to see what happened in a city in a country that's already struggling, to see that level of an explosion and
disappointing and sad.
It is. I think anytime you have a loss of innocent life on something like that was preventable, it's extremely sad.
Exactly.
But I'm sure more will come out.
Just got to wait patiently for the information to flow out. Do you think, was that a nitrate? I heard nitrate and explosion and just caused that explosion to blow up like that.
I think, from what I understand, it was a fire at a fireworks factory nearby, which again, you put your thinking hat on. Would you ever have that amount of ammonium nitrate stored near anything that was flammable? Probably not in your 1,000 years. That should have either been stored somewhere out in the desert or far away from population, and probably not in those amounts.
Right.
If you look at golf courses and other different farms that store that material, there's a pretty heavy requirement of how much you can store. You would never be able to store that amount.
Right.
And this is the reason why. So hopefully this will be an example for other countries and companies to rethink their storage, rethink what's close to it, as we do our all hazard risk assessments of a project or a company. How close is the train tracks to something like this? I can't even imagine the theory of sitting around a table and go, we have a fireworks factory over here, and we have, 20,000 pounds of nitrate less than a half a mile away or probably less than a few hundred yards. Makes no sense. No sense.
Not whatsoever. Yeah, I'm going to jump into now your position. You're the Vice President of Global Safety Security at Discoveryland, right?
Correct.
I just going through some notes, trying to figure out some good questions to ask. And what is the most common request you are receiving to fulfill in your position as Vice President there at that organization?
Right now, hands down, is all COVID related for the most part.
Okay.
For the most part, any operation, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or any company, you got to think about the resiliency aspect. How do we continue to operate in this environment? Right. So there's a lot of changing of hats. I think it was I don't know if it was Mike Howard or maybe somebody posted something recently about, or maybe it's Fred Burton,
okay,
that as CSOs or VP of security and safety, we probably didn't see this coming, where we'd have to step up and be more involved with helping to understand this pandemic, because most companies don't have doctors or infectious disease part of it. Right. So, one of my responsibilities in the safety component of my role is the medical safety. So I do have a good relationship with doctors and infectious disease doctors to help us understand, because we're in multiple countries and right. we have medical evacuation. So we have a very strong medical program. So it wasn't a strong leap for me to reach out to that group and bring them into the discussion and let them lead us to make some of the critical decisions we have to make regarding our communities, our employees, our operations. So, again, been around long enough, these experiences happens that makes you think about, or makes you still learn. I'm at 57 years old. I'm still learning something new. So a
lot of energy.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to do this. But no, it's probably COVID is still, safety and security is still a big part of what we do. We can't. Right. That's one of my fears now. I think the COVID is somewhat of a distraction.
Absolutely.
To a large degree of where some of our focuses should be, whether it's in the intel, it's in the law enforcement. Right. It's a concern of mine. We're really, truly focused on COVID. And in my role, I can't be so focused on COVID that I'm not also focusing on the safety and security aspect of my other responsibilities. But it's definitely been a lot of work, that's for sure.
I can imagine. A lot of late nights talking to doctors and trying to interpret what they're telling you medically.
A lot of Dr. Google, a lot of research.
I mean, now we're here. I hear a lot of EP teams are grounded across the country. No one's moving around. What do you see the adaptation of exec protection agent or the practitioner 2020 and 2021, since we're seeing a huge shift and change in the industry and what we've been doing?
I think there's two things. If I was back into managing a team, what would you be doing right now then leading into 2021? Training, I'm a big fan of training. Yeah. And training can be just yourself or a couple people. So I don't think COVID stops us from training. Right. If EP teams are not training right now and taking advantage of this opportunity and they're just staying at home and working on a keyboard, you're probably wrong.
You're right.
You're probably wrong. Because we often complain. That was one of the big complaints I had when I was, with a lot of teams or even managing teams. Guys saying, "I don't have enough time to train." Mike, when are we going to go get to train? Well, now's the time to go train. Exactly. So if you're not training, you're probably wrong. So I think that's a good aspect or a good, sort of element to be concentrating on. The other thing is we are going to come out of this.
Absolutely.
And our principals are going to start to travel quite a bit. Sure. And I would say they're going to travel a lot. If you're in a corporate CEO detail and that CEO hasn't been out to visit his offices and his operations globally, right? Get ready.
It's going to be madness.
There's going to be madness. The executives are going to go on a full launch, and it's going to ramp up pretty quick. So, resources, do you have enough personnel to that? Are you having conversations with your executive team? What is the plan? Are you going to be ramping it pretty fast? Right. Do you have enough team members? How do we handle the COVID travel? And I think right now we still have probably, in my opinion, another year of some of these restrictions. stipulations regarding COVID.
Okay.
So how do we come out of that? So I think it's a discussion teams have to have. And I think the other thing, and Mark, and you're aware of this as well, because I think you and I went back and forth on this recently.
Yeah, we did.
There's been a lot of poor decision making in the last year or two.
Absolutely.
With our security professionals.
Right.
And I think now is a good time to take a step back and evaluate your program and evaluate your sort of your philosophy, your protocols,
Okay.
your methodology for what you're doing. And, you may have to do some adjustment. And some of that adjustment may run across your tactics, your procedures, or maybe your ethics. It's all across the board.
Okay.
And I think that fits into your fearless mindset.
Yeah.
I thought about that when you were talking about the title of it, and I love the title. I love the topic, fearless mindset. But fearless isn't just your ability to handle a high stress situation. I think fearless also applies into your ability to make good decisions.
Absolutely.
And so I think your topic, you have a good topic, but there's two topics. There's two parts of that. There's the mindset, which is important.
Right.
And then the fearless component.
Yeah.
And fearless is not just EP operators, security, military, first responders. It's also parents and teachers and doctors and construction workers. So that fearless component is a very interesting conversation. I think you'll have fun with.
Yeah, it's been crazy, just the environment we're in, and everybody's, of course, locked in that state of fear because they don't want to get sick. When's the vaccine going to be made? How about therapies? When's it going to happen? When can we go back to work? Everybody's paralyzed by fear because they don't know if they're going to pay their mortgage or pay their bills, provide for their family. So we're in crazy times in our country. So yeah, thanks for the compliment and the accolades on that. I'm just like, this is all a new venture, and I'm like, you got to recreate the wheel. Everybody's sitting at home, might as well do something.
Absolutely. Well, good for you. I'm glad you did this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I think are we wrapping up there, Christopher?
You got one or two more questions.
Okay. Yeah, another question I have is, with all your high net worth clients that you have at Discovery Land, how are their security needs changed aside from COVID-19? Are they just all paranoid from COVID-19 and getting sick? Is that kind of the gist of it?
If I could generalize that comment, because the same way you have, the non-disclosures and the privacy aspect of it. But I think if I could generalize, it's the uncertainty. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's the fear factor. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And if you know one thing, those with a lot of money like to be in control, and they like to have that. So they're in a situation where they're not in control. They can't say, you know what, we're just going to fly to Europe. Well, no, you're not. You're not. We're just going to go to our home in the Bahamas or visit with somebody. No, you're not, because they're not going to let you in. So they're in a position where they have to be almost like everybody else. They may have a big staff that helps them through this pandemic to a degree, maybe not. Right. But I think it's just that fear of the unknown, and how do I change how do I get my head around, I have a lot of money, I have a lot of power, but I can't do what I want to do. So they're just like the rest of us. They're looking to
being told no.
Exactly. And for some of these people, that may be tougher than you and I, what we're going through.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap this up. I know your time is very valuable. If you haven't read this yet, order Amazon. Is that correct, Mike?
Amazon's fine. Yeah.
And I'm sure he's got a stack of books to sell, but worth the read. You'll learn a ton. And it's been an honor and privilege to have you on my podcast. You're my first one, and you got me over the nervous sector. You do this normally and naturally, so I'm like getting used to this.
Mark, you did a good job. And again, thank you. It's an honor to be on your first podcast. And I think as a former Marine, or still a Marine, as you guys say, it would be, we missed the opportunity to kind of give our condolences to the Marines that we just lost down in San Diego on the amphibious training. That's another topic of mine that I find frustrating sometimes. It's the number of good soldiers we lose in training.
Absolutely. So
and while the training is important and we have to have that sharp skill set, I hate it when we see our soldiers and Marine sailors, airmen, die from a training accident. It's just so unfortunate. So
Exactly.
I
That's
really,
definitely something I should think about maybe with Christopher, to maybe watching something just of that subject matter.
I think so. I think so. But my heart goes out to them, and condolences to them and their family and their teammates.
Amen to that. Prayers and hearts go out to them for sure. Sacrificing their lives during training.
Absolutely. Mark, I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mike. I'll be in touch.
Best of luck to you.
You too, brother.
Okay. Bye-bye.